welcome to episode 4 in this series of videos on zonal marketing, a new model which uses the tactical lessons taken from football management to help you to plan, activate and measure your marketing campaigns effectively. I'm Simon Vincent, the marketing tactician, and in this episode we're going to explore the concept of width. What we've looked at in previous videos is essentially how deep in the pitch a player or channel is. So therefore those that are higher up the pitch are those that are more transactional, more likely to lead to a sale, whereas those who are lower in the pitch are the ones that are more tribal. They're the ones that are better at keeping your customers and building that core database of followers. A similar thing can be seen when it comes to the concept of width. So players, the area of most threat in a football pitch is right down the centre. This is because the goals are right in the centre and they only take up a very small amount of the total width of the pitch. As such, players who are right down the centre, play right down the centre, or just outside the centre, are the ones who are most likely to be directly involved in the scoring and or stopping of conceding of goals. But that's not to say that a wide player doesn't have a purpose, far from it. It's simply that players who play out wide are typically involved in more of an assisting role than they are in the actual scoring and or directly stopping the scoring of a goal for the opposition. In zonal marketing, the concept of width refers to audience profiling. How wide do we want to cast our net in terms of bringing customers into the brand and showing them our messages? For simplicity, you'll see here that I've actually divided my pitch up into essentially 4 sections. It looks like 7, but it's actually 4. There's this one central column down the middle here, and then what you have is another 1, 2, 3 sections that fan out from the middle, but essentially this section right next to the center column and this section are the same zone and will be treated as such. So without further ado, I suppose let's go into each one in turn. The central singular zone down the centre of the pitch is known as the personal and proactive zone. I've mentioned above that players who play down the centre of the pitch are often referred to as the spine of the team, and that's important because they often are in positions of extreme influence, being in that area of the pitch. In marketing, an equivalent exists, and that is when you personalize and proactively target your audience with your content or communications. You've probably heard that word of mouth is the most effective form of marketing, and that's because word of mouth typically occurs between 2 people who know each other really well and can therefore personalize and recommend to each other things that they might like. You know, have you heard of this new restaurant? You'd love it. Or this brand's style is exactly up your street. The personalised nature of the endorsement makes us far more likely to consider purchasing whatever's being discussed because we feel that the recommendation has been tailored to our own specific interests, needs or preferences. When that recommendation is proactively offered, it becomes uniquely powerful because it implies a sense of agency, a sense of almost a I saw this and thought of you effect, which is lovely because it makes us feel warm and glowing and like we symbolize a certain thing, or that person knows us really, really well and just had to tell us about this new product or company. However, word of mouth isn't the only channel that can be personalized and proactive. In fact, many marketing channels nowadays can be targeted this way if used appropriately. Email marketing, for example, can not only include the customer's name nowadays, but can actually have content and even send time amended automatically by many softwares in order to reach out to people based on their specific interests and past purchase history. One of my favorite examples is moonpig.com, because several years ago I went into their website and I ordered a birthday card for people that I love. And now every year I get an email about a week out from those birthdays with Moonpig asking me would I like to buy another card for them, because it understands that if you buy a birthday card, that person's probably going to want another one at exactly the same time the next year. I love the fact that Moonpig does that because it makes them happy. The person I'm sending the card to makes me look good. Oh, and by the way, it has the additional benefit of giving Moonpig easy, predictable, recurring revenue year on year on year. Nowadays, I buy nearly all of my cards from Moonpig.com, despite or perhaps because of their annoying jingle, because I feel like in some way they get me. They know who I am, they know who my loved ones are, they know when their birthdays are, and they know to remind me to buy them a card when it comes up to their birthday. So I kind of feel like I can't really move away from them because I'd have to set all of that up again with another supplier if I did. As such, if I was Moonpig.com's marketing team and I was using the zonal marketing structure, I would be placing email marketing, based on my example there, placing email marketing within the broadcast channel area, and because it's personalized and proactive, it would be right there in the center. As we move out from the center in either direction, we come to the second zone, and that is the customer demanded zone. In this zone, communications are often still personalized to the particular customer or tailored to their needs, but because they're initiated by the customer, that makes them ever so slightly less effective at selling or retaining customers than they would be if we'd been in the personalized and proactive zone. After all, if your customer is proactively reaching out to you, particularly in a selling situation, they're probably shopping around and looking at your competitors and comparing prices, etc., etc. A great example of a customer demanded channel is Google search marketing. So while activities such as search engine optimization or SEO and pay-per-click advertising, PPC, can be some of the most effective, high converting, efficient ways of advertising, they're also reliant on the customer searching for you. They don't stimulate demand, they simply cater to it. Henry Ford once said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they'd have said a faster horse. Using that example, if you were to invent the car today and rely purely on search marketing, Google search marketing, to advertise your product, you wouldn't get very far because people wouldn't know how to search for a car, and therefore nobody would be clicking on your ads and therefore going on to buy your product. Mostly Google search marketing sits in this broadcast channel zone here, in one of these two customer demanded zones right here. Of course, almost all customer service sits in this zone as well, but in the audience channel section in here and in here. So of course, if your company allows your customers to call or email or chat with you via web chat, those channels will sit in these sections here. As we move yet another stage away from the center of the pitch, the audience profiling moves away from the individual and more towards groups of people. And so the next section outside of the customer demanded zone is the niche interest zone. This is where we start to target people based on their interests, their preferences, rather than their individual situational requirements. The more niche their interests, the closer to the center of this section they're going to be, whereas the more general their interests, the wider out to the side of this section they're going to be. In this section, we are very much in the world of company-initiated communications. We are proactively reaching out to the customer as opposed to waiting for them to come to us, advertising in the loosest sense of the word. But with that comes obviously a cooler level of intent from the customer. If we've reached out to them into their personal spaces rather than them coming to us, they are obviously far less likely to be interested in buying from us in that circumstance. A nice little tip here to kind of combat the coolness of that audience is to go as niche as you possibly can. Bring these right in here. Focus on what Seth Godin refers to as the minimum viable audience, and then speak to them in the sort of coded language and semiotics that only they understand. If you can do that, and make them really feel these customers like you get them, that is actually a really phenomenally powerful tool to be able to use. The benefit that the niche interest zone has over the previous two is that, of course, we're not waiting for the customer to come to us. We are proactively reaching out to them, and in that respect it is great at getting the message out about your company. Using my Henry Ford example earlier, if you've invented something that people don't know about, this is definitely the section that you want to be starting to reach into, as opposed to going too narrow down the middle. Channels that sit typically within the niche interest zone are things like social media does this really well, and also a PR campaign that targets, for example, really niche publications. They will both sit really neatly in this niche interest zone here. A company that uses this area really well is the fashion label Supreme. They're really well known for the collaborations that they do, but they don't tend to collaborate with the biggest names that they possibly can. They tend to work with really small niche other brands and connect with them, but brands that, like Supreme, have this really obsessive dedicated fan base, and therefore they kind of bring in all these niches of other fan bases through their collaboration process, which obviously then helps to bring in yet more really obsessed and fully invested fans to the Supreme brand. And so we move into the final section, the mass market section, right out here on the periphery. And this is what we typically associate with the concept of marketing and advertising. It dates back to a previous era where channels were less sophisticated, targeting a little bit more crude, and people's interests fundamentally were a little bit more sort of standard, conventional and universal. It was, and honestly still is, a little bit of an elitist zone. It's the area where we're furthest from the goal out here, and that means that it really is kind of the preserve of the biggest companies who have the most budget and are able to dedicate the budget to doing this. It's where channels such as TV, radio and print advertising and editorial sit, and it's these lean back media, as Marshall McLuhan termed them, that are notoriously really difficult to track and measure back to a sale, as an example. And that fundamentally is because of the way in which people consume these media. They do it literally sitting back, as opposed to lean forward media, typically anything that involves the usage of a laptop, for example, where the inclusion of calls to action such as buy now or click here are far more prevalent and far easier to actually action as far as the customer is concerned, and therefore track from a company's point of view. So why do big brands continue to use these inefficient, hard to measure, very wide areas in their advertising? Well, two reasons. One, reach, and two, perception. Using the mass media exposes a brand to a huge number of people simultaneously, and in doing so actually helps to create these communal moments that actually can be shared between huge groups of people. So things like, for example, the John Lewis Christmas ad gets shown on TV every year and creates these kind of moments around the dinner table that families talk about. Similarly, in the US, you have things like the Super Bowl, where the TV advertising that goes on during the Super Bowl is obviously creates these water cooler moments that are discussed by people who've watched the match for weeks afterwards. Of course, people are unlikely to break away from these meals or from these water cooler moments to go out and buy a nice set of throw cushions or sign up with T-Mobile or whatever it is. But the awareness that advertising in such a big spot brings is really valuable to a big company in terms of getting their message out. That in turn leads to an uplift in brand perception. If I know the name of the company, if my friends and family know the name of the company, if they are successful enough to be able to advertise on TV, then they must be a company that's trustworthy, that if I go and buy from them, my investment will be safe. Or so the feeling goes. If we go back to episode 2, where we talked about the importance of space and possession within the zonal marketing framework, this all starts to make things become a little bit clearer. Mass market communication, like playing wide men in football, is a space creating move, and as such it's actually the sort of thing that's typically done by the bigger teams in football and the bigger brands in marketing. In football, sides that tend to use the width more tend to be the bigger sides. What do we say about underdog teams? That they need to keep it tight, keep it compact. Whereas the name brands, teams like, for example, the hugely successful Manchester United team from the 90s, were famed for using the width because they wanted to stretch their opposition out, draw the opposition in, and then they trusted their wide players' ability to get the ball into the middle to the areas of most attacking threat. The same is true of the biggest companies with their marketing. The big boys know that if they create space by putting this non-salesy content out there, what it does do is it draws out the customer's resistance. It makes them loosen their grip on that resistance, such that when the ball is delivered, when the customer is delivered to the conversion points, it makes it far easier for them to buy from that company because they trust them, because they're aware of them, because they feel like their investment is safe. Okay, that's it for this episode. Check back again next week when I'll be explaining another part of the marketing mix through the footballing lens. If you're enjoying what you're watching, please do like and comment, and while you're at it, why not ask a few friends to share with their friends. I am available for speaking gigs, for training, and for client work, and if you'd like to find out any more about any of that, please do visit my website, x-cmo.com. In the next session, we'll be talking about content and how the way you approach it can vastly alter how your channels perform. A bit like asking a midfielder to be a creator or a destroyer. But how do you create a Claude Makélélé in your marketing mix, and what constitutes an Andrea Pirlo? Find out next time. Until then, thank you so much for your attention.